Thank you, Adam. It's time to talk about China. As everyone in this room no doubt knows, China is our global engine of growth. All that industrialization and urbanization has led to that, but it's also come at a huge cost. China is, of course, the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and it's got a pollution crisis that is really out of control, responsible for 1.2 million premature deaths each year annually, and leading to shortened lifespans. The water supply in China is 50% what it was, and much of what remains is too polluted to use. Current trends are only going to accelerate, and if we don't solve China, we don't solve anything. So my esteemed panelists are here to solve China. We have a great group. To my right is Deb Frodl, who is basically the CEO of Ecomagination for GE, where she heads the company's efforts to develop clean energy solutions all over the world, and has been particularly active in China, of course. Then we have Ming, who's the Chief Representative for Asia Pacific for the Clean Air Task Force. Ming runs its efforts to deploy low carbon energy technologies. And Ming has a really long career in the energy industry. He worked for Shell for 25 years and was tapped by Jimmy Carter in the 70s to literally create the Department of Energy. Also interesting about Ming is that he's the only person in Texas who doesn't own a car. And then we have Jonathan Woetzel, who's director for McKinsey based in Shanghai. He heads the company's Global Cities Initiative and co-chairs its Urban China think tank. He's been based in China for 27 years and has written 3 books about China. So welcome to my esteemed panelists. Jonathan, I want to start with you. You are on the ground there. You're living there day in and day out. Give us a read. What is the situation like on the ground in China? And what can you say about the pace of the efforts to deal with this crisis, and where are we?
Well, the premier came out the other day, a couple months ago, talking about the war on pollution, and that was new language, and I think that reflects the reality of what has shown up in Beijing, particularly over the last 12 to 24 months, or not shown up in this case because of the sort of difficulty to actually see on the other side of the street. And war is an aptly chosen word, I believe, because it does reflect the need to take what might look like in the short term non-economic decisions, that there are some externalities that have shown up which are now requiring government to rethink the economic framework. That's a huge order of magnitude kind of shift at the political level. And at the grounders level, I mean, all I can say is that, it's the first time now that we start to see, health warnings for playgrounds. So it's not safe to go out and play today. Kids have to stay inside. This is very visible. It affects everybody. And that's why we start to see the political reality changing.
Ming, talk to us about China's continuing dependence on coal. Coal powers 85% of China's electricity. There are 400 close to it coal plants in the pipeline. How can we even begin to address this crisis as long as that's the case? Tell us about that a little bit and where we stand with carbon capture and storage technology.
Well, the situation in China is that they are not blessed with other energy resources. They don't have much oil. They do have gas reserve, the shale gas, but it's not developed. So the only energy resource reliably they have is coal. So their average fleet of coal plants is about 10 years old, where United States, coal plants last about 50 years. So even if they don't build any new ones, there's a huge fleet sitting there and another 40 years to run. So we have to work with them to clean up the coal plants that generate electricity, because electricity is fundamental to livelihood anywhere in the world. So clean coal technology, indeed, it's available. US very innovative. We have technologies. And I have coined a phrase called ccus. It's carbon capture, utilization, and the last resort is storage or sequestration of the CO2. And US, China is working closely together to try to resolve that. And in fact, there's a group called Climate Change Working Group that started by John Kerry, our Secretary of State, and his corresponding person, Minister Young, and we're working as a small group. CCUS is one of the core theme in that climate change working group.
But where do we stand now? I mean, if kids are already not going outside to play, so where is CCS technology, and you know, is it still the concept car in the driveway, you know, not the minivan that it needs to be to really make the huge change? Where are we in the phase? And when can it scale?
Well, actually, for example, in Shanghai, there is a plant in Huanan, power plant. Huanan is the largest power company in China and in the world. They are capturing CO2 from the smokestacks and making into food products, go to Coca-Cola, dry ice, and so on. So they're doing that. Now, food utilization of CO2 is limited. One of the bigger use is for enhanced oil recovery. So in the United States, EOR has been around for 30 years. China is just at the beginning. When I say clean up the CO2, once you take care of the CO2, you take care of all other pollutants like SOx, NOx, hydrocarbons, and so on. What we call the priority pollutants in the United States, we have solved that problem and China have not. But we want to help them to take care not only the priority pollutants, but go all the way to take care of the greenhouse gases. So that is the challenge that we are trying to push. And I think the private industry and public working together is really the right thing to do.
Deb, what are your thoughts on CCS technology and it being the answer in China? And what else are you looking at?
So, you know, I agree with Ming and his comments on CCS. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And our belief is beyond just coal and CCS. We believe that there has to be a diversification of fuel. We see gas as a real opportunity. There is an abundance of gas in China. And, you know, the primary energy consumption today is 4%. It's going to go to 8% in the next 10 years. Gas-powered energy is a real alternative to the coal domination that is in China today, but it requires good oversight, but it is cleaner, it's more flexible, it's far more efficient, really meets the needs of diversification in China. It is a good complement with renewables that is happening in the region as well. So it's not to say that there is not a lot of headwinds to accomplish this. You know, to get at the gas supply requires infrastructure and the pipeline. It requires gas pricing as well, because there is still such an abundance of coal and it's cheap. But we have to work on those things together, collaboration with the right partners. It's great from a GE perspective. We're a technology company. We have technology that can be deployed today on the extraction side, the transportation side, the power generation side that could be implemented immediately, but we have to help you know, with the appropriate collaborations and policy frameworks.
Jonathan, as an expert on cities, what can urban design do to help mitigate the pollution crisis? Everything from the way cities are designed and built, and where have you seen that helping to you know, transportation and transportation policy?
Sure, and yourself as an expert on cities as well, I'd love to hear your views.
And everyone can hear us both tomorrow morning, just a little plug.
Let's talk about it. Come talk about cities. Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, let's not underplay what China is doing. China is making the single greatest global contribution to mitigating greenhouse gases of any country. And the efforts that China has taken on energy efficiency, on renewable energies, on now on transport and building out subway system. I mean, thousands and thousands of kilometers of subway systems are being built as we speak. The high-speed rail system was essentially built in 10 years, which is, you know, staggering, you know, if you think about the impacts of this. So there is, you know, there's huge transformation going on right now. So now it's just a question, in a sense, of continuing that transformation and maybe perhaps tweaking it and expanding it a bit. So The cities and what they can contribute, well, yes, clearly there's the whole aspect of buildings and how we make the buildings more effective and sustainable for the communities within which they live. China's cities expanded by their land area by roughly 3 or 4 times in the 90s. That's essentially done. So we're done with the spatial footprint of the expansion. Now it's about filling that in. And so as we think about essentially the capital stock of the city is going to turn over 2 or 3 times. Essentially everything you look when you take an average picture of China is going to be gone in 20 years. So we have a massive opportunity to rebuild the cities in China. And as we rebuild that with the technologies that we have today, obviously it can have a huge benefit for emissions, for energy usage, and so forth. So I think the buildings is one big part. Transport is another big part because if we continue, if China has 400 million cars in the year 2030, that's not a good thing. So we want to try to go for 250 million cars. Still a lot of cars. But the difference between 250 million cars and 400 million cars is effective public transit. And so that building out another couple thousand kilometers of subways, that would help. And then finally, energy. I mean, distributed energy and district energy heating systems, incorporating that particularly in the north, that makes a big difference in terms of the energy requirements for cities. And so working with large-scale developers on residential and commercial complexes to integrate best-of-breed commercialized technologies is another big opportunity.
We're going to go to questions, open up for questions in just a minute. But Ming, does there seem to be a real shift in the political will to do all this compared to in the past? When kids aren't going outside to play, when multinational executives are really thinking hard about relocating, does there seem to be a shift with the Chinese government to really make this happen?
Well, the current Chinese administration, they really want to look at the facts and they want to do something about it. Jonathan is right that they are making plans. They are executing some of the things. So for air pollution specifically, they're targeting the Beijing area, the Shanghai area, and the Guangdong area. Those are the priority 3 regions. And they're going to clean up the coal use and lower the emissions from other industries and also increase the quality of the fuel for transportation area. On top of that, they're building a lot of subways, public transportations, and they're doing all of those above. And US and Europe can transfer some of the technology and devices to help them accelerate those. So I'm very hopeful that they can do, and they are doing it.
Let's take a question. Let's start off with Matthew Norden. Is Matthew here from MLN Partners?
Yes, thank you. This is a fascinating discussion. My firm and most of our work is very much focused on China, so it's interesting to hear your perspectives. Ming, I'm curious, given your comments about CCUS, how you square sort of 2 data points. On one hand, particularly around externally visible events like the 2008 Olympics, there have been some forward-thinking efforts to go at carbon dioxide emissions in China. With that said, I think a skeptic, can look at the actions of the regime and think that they are very focused on insulating middle-income and wealthy urban dwellers from the effects of SOx and NOx and particulates that impact their life when you go out the door and that could come at a risk to social stability. The trade-off to that appears to be that the regime is very comfortable to build enormous coal centers in the hinterlands that belch enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but insulate urban dwellers from the SOx and NOx and particulate effects. So do you think that the action on CO2 specifically, not the dioxins and particulates and other stuff, is something that China is serious about, or do you feel that that's more lip service at this stage?
Well, from what I'm working with, the powers in place, powers to be, they are working very hard on what I call the priority pollutants, the SOx, NOx, and particular matters that affects people's health immediately. They are addressing those issues. On top of that, many of the major industries are working on the CCUS, which address the greenhouse gas. In fact, US DOE and Chinese corresponding agencies, National Energy Administration and NDRC, are working very closely together, and hopefully when 3 of our secretaries going there in July for strategic economic dialogue, there will be announcements. What we believe, the actions really can be done by the private industries, the companies. The government will lay the ground, give the direction, and give the level playing ground. And once you set the direction, the private industry will execute as long as there's incentive. And in China, they are giving the incentive, and they will work on it. So they will take, it will take capital, money, and technology, and the will. And I know GE is working together with their counterparts, and you guys are providing capital and so on. So I have seen action actually is being done via nonprofit, so I can't talk about specifically which projects until the companies themselves announce. But I've seen many in the hands of legal, checking out all the agreements, so I know it's being done.
Who has another question? Anyone? Oh, up in the back here.
Thank you. I'm Zalong from Blue Sky Consulting. Would love to hear your assessment on the current state of US-China collaboration on these to address the pollution crisis, especially given the complicated geopolitical challenges. Is there enough safe space for the business leaders from both countries to come together and take some leadership? Thank you.
Who wants to take this? Do you want to direct this at one person? Anybody? Okay, who wants to take this?
I thought it was just a comment.
Oh, okay. You don't want to?
Absolutely. You know, I think there's a lot of work to be done between the U.S. and China, and you know, it's policy work that needs to be shaped. I mean, China does a great job with their 5-year plan, being very transparent about the efforts that they're making, but I think there's business opportunity and collaborations that can also help from a technology development standpoint, determining those local technologies that can help and make a difference outside of policy as well. Partnerships are very critical. GE has several partnerships that we're working on the technology development side. We just opened our 3rd Customer Innovation Center. We're co-creating and developing technology locally to help progress. So I think there's a multiple of things. I think it's policy, but I think it's business action and collaboration as well that will drive the change.
I would add to that China, most of the industry is led by the state-owned enterprise. So in China, the government direction plays a very, very strong role. So in the US, government is not as strong, but we can influence, private industry can influence our government easier than Chinese industry influence their government. So, but collectively, we can ask our public servants to work with us to influence China and make these partnerships much easier and move a lot faster. And that's, you know, we collectively can act as a catalyst that will work a lot faster. And of course, money is important.
It's always important.
Anyone else? One more question? Yep, over here.
Hi, Brian Demain from Fortune. So, question to Jonathan. So, this is all going to take money, and you know, as a consultant, you look at these things, and you know what makes financial sense, what doesn't. You're talking about carbon capture storage. Sounds great. Some estimates say it's going to add 30% to the cost of electricity generation. Who's going to pay for all of this? It's one thing for the government in Beijing to say we're going to do this, but when I was in China last year, I heard a conversation between a minister from China and an executive, and the minister said, fine, we'll do carbon capture, but you people in the West are going to have to pay for it because you polluted in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, to be clear, I'm a consultant, not banker, but anyway. Yeah, I personally, I would not start with CCS. I mean, and to the extent I would start with that, I would CCUS, who says, so let's do it, you just take the carbon and do something with it. So EOR is obviously better, so then you can actually use it to get something out of the ground. You know, usually this comes back to an issue of financing sort of fuels tax versus carbon tax and mechanisms like that. And end of the day, most of the people would say it's not very inflationary, which is essentially the question you're asking. So does this create a big drag on the economy? So 80%, when we did the cost curve, we found that 60 to 80% of the abatement measures were all NPV neutral or positive. So, you know, there's energy efficiency is always a good thing. It's just more of an agency question. And how do you figure out how to fund all this? How do you figure out how to close the loop between the collateral and the savings and setting the baseline, ultimately a systems problem, putting information out there. So there is a 20%, which is really expensive, and we'll probably need to have some funding associated with it. And China is saying, yeah, we'll go for the low-hanging fruit. So right now they're saying, let's go for the stuff that is energy, that is NPV neutral to positive, and makes a tangible difference and hits a bunch of the issues at the same time. So if your technology is neutral to positive, can do something about the air, contributes to carbon, and importantly fits into the Chinese technology system. So it's not something that just sort of comes from outer space and has to replace an entire ecosystem, but recognizes the reality of the supply chain and works with that. It can get used. And I see some great examples of that happening all the time. My favorite is a West Virginia company that is sort of now becoming like a remediation company for China, going around cleaning up oil fields. It's just a classic urbanization story. You know, you had a factory downtown. Now the factory has to move. City expands. Huge mess. Have to clean it up. You know, then you bring the technology in, and it really works. It's an amazing thing.
That's a great note to end on, from China to West Virginia. I want to thank my panelists for a great conversation, and we'll check back on this topic same time next year. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.